What's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. Grover is an extremely powerful healer this patch with the ability to provide some truly massive group healing while dealing substantial damage and crippling enemies at the same time. He is a fantastic asset to any team, which is why today I'll be going over the best tips, tricks, and loadouts to help you get better at Grover. But before we get into the video, let's quickly go over how Grover's talents and kit function. Grover's primary fire is quite an interesting weapon to use, since it's a simple throwing axe hurled in a straight line which deals more damage the farther out your target is. So to do more damage to a target, you need to be far away from them, making Grover a sort of sniper healer. It also means that Grover has some of the strongest muscles out of all the champions in the game, because to be able to throw an axe perfectly straight for hundreds of meters is quite an impressive feat. Grover's next ability is a really powerful crowd control ability, which throws an axe sideways that cripples whoever it hits. Unfortunately, its damage does not scale with range like his normal primary fire, instead dealing a flat 400 damage, but at least you can throw it directly after a normal axe for some decent burst. Now onto Grover's main healing ability, Blossom. This is a really powerful AoE healing ability which also heals Grover himself, giving him arguably better self-sustain than champions like Furia and Genos. Blossom is the only passive healing ability in the game, constantly healing everyone around him for 80 health a second. However, when Grover activates his Blossom, he heals everyone in his radius for a burst of 800 health, which is pretty fantastic. His last ability before his ultimate is his Vine, which is in my opinion one of the best movement abilities in the support class. While it doesn't have the same invulnerability time as Moldambas, Cereses, or Grox, what it does have is excellent mobility, with the best vertical and horizontal distance coverage simultaneously in a short amount of time. With his Vine, you can easily grapple up to the high ground on Serpent Beach from the bridge at the objective, or you can swing from rooftop to rooftop on Timber Mill. You can also grapple directly onto teammates, which can be helpful if you need to get to them for a quick heal. And lastly, his ultimate is a super strong healing ultimate. In a small radius around him, not quite as large as the radius of his Blossom, Grover heals everyone for 2500 health a second, which basically turns him into a wider, portable Solar Blessing Beam from Furia. Without proper cauterize or heavy focus, there is almost no way to stop his ult from saving him and his teammates, and with the right timing, it is a super strong healing ability. Now let's move on to his talents. All three of Grover's talents are really good and are pretty situational, with the first being Rampant Blooming, which gives Blossom a bit of trickle healing after the initial burst of 800. This makes him an even better healer than he already is, and it is perfect if you have 2 tanks to heal. Next is Ferocity, which simply increases the scaling of his axe by quite a substantial amount, turning him into a lethal sniper capable of easily hitting axes for upwards of 600 damage at medium range and 900 damage at long range. This is fantastic on maps like Timbermill or Frog Isle, even with his healing build, because he'll be able to pose a serious threat to the pesky snipers that you often find on these maps. Last is Deep Roots, which first roots whoever his crippling throw hits, making them unable to move, and then bounces between up to 5 other champions within 22 units of each other. This talent is fantastic against high mobility targets such as Maeve, Eevee, or Ruckus, so if the enemy team has 2 flanks, this is the preferred talent for Grover because of how vulnerable it makes enemies to the rest of your team. Alright, now let's look at the types of loadouts you'll want to be using for Grover. Grover is a very unique champion in that he can use pretty much any talent depending on the situation with his healing build and still do really well, which is good to keep in mind. We'll start off with his healing build since he is first and foremost a healer. This first one is what I like to call the Old Reliable. It's a very typical healing build for Grover, with maximum points allocated into range and Blossom with some filler cards. This will reliably give you your Blossom every 8 seconds without Chronos and every 5.6 seconds with Chronos, and is pretty dependable. However, there's another way in which you can build a loadout that greatly increases the uptime of your Blossom in Season 3. This build is what I like to call the high-risk Death Ball loadout. This is a very risky loadout to use, but under the right circumstances it provides more healing than any of the other loadouts for Grover. This build is extremely dependent on 2 factors, being able to hit your cripple, and your team being able to score eliminations. If both of these conditions are met after using your Blossom, you can have it back up in as little as 2.6 seconds without Chronos, which is pretty incredible. If you use this loadout with a good team that can reliably score kills after you heal them, you can put out an insane amount of healing, and have matches like these where you score almost 90k healing in a little over 7 minutes. This works best in parties where you know you have reliable damage champions, and I only recommend using this if you're an experienced Grover who is already good at hitting his crippling throw. However, in the right situation, this loadout pays off immensely. Next, let's go over his damage builds, with one generally built around survivability for Ferocity and one built around using his crippling throw as much as possible. Keep in mind that you can still use these talents with his normal healing loadouts though, if you want to be both a solid healer and a solid DPS. First, let's talk about his crippling loadout. This loadout is all about having his cripple up as much as possible, with Chop Down at 5 for maximum cooldown reduction and Adrenaline, which is just a super helpful card to have. We also have some increased health for more survivability, and Vine Grasp and Pickup for some increased uptime on his Vine and to make it easier to use. The Ferocity loadout I've made for him looks a bit different, with increased focus on survivability and just becoming an absolute killing machine. We have Unstoppable at 5 so he can stay in a fight for a bit longer after using Blossom, and Rebound at 3 so he can heal himself for an additional 120 HP after using Blossom. We also have Adrenaline and Vine Grass because they're super helpful on any build, and then Bark Skin for some extra health. So let's move on to the gameplay tips which will really help bring your Grover gameplay to the next level. One of the most important abilities to learn how to use effectively is his Vine, which you can use to travel across the map incredibly quickly and reach any high ground in the game. Now, the most obvious way to use it is to point it directly at where you want to go and activate the ability, which can work sometimes if a teammate doesn't get in your way. However, if you're trying to maximize how far you go with your Vine, there's a much better way to use it. Grover's Vine has a limited range, but it carries a lot of momentum with it. So if you vine up to a high wall running parallel to the direction you want to go, you can go slightly farther than if you were to just aim it at the floor. And it's also a lot harder to hit you, and there's less of a chance you'll accidentally vine to your teammates. You'll also look a lot cooler while doing this. However, when trying to vine up to a platform, especially from far away, this momentum can also be a curse, since it can make you overshoot your target if you're not careful. If you try and vine up to a high platform and do so from far away horizontally, there's a very good chance that the momentum will carry you up and over the platform, so it helps to be close to the platform which you want to get up onto. Alternatively, if you're forced to vine to it from far away, try and have something block your momentum like a wall which will essentially catch you from falling off the platform. You can also try and use his vine directly on the floor of the platform, which can work if you're below it, but sometimes it may or may not work if you overshoot the platform if you don't use it perfectly perpendicular to the platform. Proper usage of his crippling throw is also important. It is critical that you try to never use his crippling throw on a champion with no movement ability when you're not using deep roots. This is because it will have literally no effect on them whatsoever, since they have no movement abilities to be crippled. Then, if you've used it on someone without a movement ability, and someone with a movement ability like Koga comes around to flank you, you won't have your crippling throw available to cripple him and buy you some time to escape and have your team kill him. Of course, with deep roots you'll be rooting the enemies in place, so it's okay to use it on champions without movement abilities then, but normally you should try to avoid it throwing it at champions like Inara, Tyra, and Vivian when you're not running this talent. There is one exception, and that is when you're using the high-risk loadout I mentioned earlier, which uses the crippling throw to reduce the cooldown of Blossom. In that case, it's okay to throw his crippling throw at someone without a movement ability only if there's no other available targets you can easily hit. It's also important to note that you can use his crippling throw almost immediately after a normal axe throw, so you can throw them in quick succession for some nice burst. There aren't really too many gameplay tips for his Blossom or his heal except for mastering timing and positioning. Of course, as with every other healer in the game, the optimal time to heal is when your teammates will be able to receive the full benefit of the heal and when they're not being cauterized. So it's helpful to find situations like that to use your Blossom in, although you won't be getting those all the time. What's not as obvious though is positioning. With the right healing build, his Blossom has an immense range, allowing him to heal multiple teammates from a good distance away. You want to try and position yourself to where you can heal multiple low teammates at the same time, so it pays to get comfortable with his range and then position yourself sort of in between your tanks and your backline champions so you can heal both simultaneously. Grover's ultimate has a much stronger range than his Blossom, but it still lets you heal multiple teammates at the same time if they're grouped up. As far as timing goes, you really want to use it whenever you see someone taking a ton of damage, particularly the tank. If they won't immediately be in range, you should vine to them first and then use your ult to save them. You can also use it to save yourself at times, but I do not recommend doing this unless you really need to or you're going for a dedicated damage build, because it's better spent saving a teammate. Also, when the enemy team has Cauterize 3, you don't want to ult on low HP when you're getting shot at because there's a pretty good chance you'll die and the ult will be wasted. You want to make sure you have enough health to survive a few shots when you ult, or ult from behind a corner where they can't hit you and then go out to heal your teammates. Alright, now let's move on to items. As far as items go, there are two you should try and rush for as soon as possible if you're playing Healer Grover, and those are Chronos and Morale Boost. Both of these are helpful on his healer build for obvious reasons. They reduce the time it takes for him to get both of his healing abilities up. Master Riding can also be good so you can get back to the fight quicker if you die and provide your team with life-saving healing. As far as other items go on his healer build, any of the necessary defensive items are great to pick up after getting Chronos and Morale Boost. I don't really recommend buying any of the healing items, since Grover receives every single bit of healing that his teammates do because all of his healing abilities apply to himself. It's just a waste of credits in most circumstances, but if you do find that you could use a bit of extra healing, I recommend going for kill to heal out of all the available options, since you do get assists for healing teammates who then score a kill. As far as defensive items go, the only one you really receive a lot of use from is Cauterize, since it'll help you score kills easier with his damage build and it helps your team out the most if you're going healer. The reason I'd say to shy away from Wrecker and Bulldozer is because for some strange reason the damage on his axes doesn't scale at all when shooting shields or deployables, so you only deal a flat 300 damage. This means that you'll be sitting there for a while shooting down most deployables and shields even with Wrecker or Bulldozer 3, so it's best to leave the job of shooting those down for the damage champions on your team. But anyways, that's the end of this video. Did this video help you get better at Grover the Wild? If it did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload from me. Also, join my Discord server in the description to pick up tips, leave suggestions, and become a part of our active community. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.